Strange, but true stories. Tales from the light side, the dark side, and the other side. I'm Steve White. When you hear a ghost story, typically it's of some malevolent spirit that wants the living person to vacate the area as quickly as possible. Noisy ghosts, evil spirits, sinister entities. But what about the friendly ghosts that are still among us, intent on assisting or protecting us in our times of need, or maybe just having a little fun with us? Following are 3 tales submitted to us by viewers like you, of ghosts who simply want to continue their role they had in life in the afterlife. The sweet smell of roses. I don't usually tell people about our ghost, as she isn't really scary. People always sound so disappointed that our ghost doesn't scare the pants off anyone. But she doesn't, and we like her. We live in a pre-World War II house on the south coast of England in East Sussex. We moved here just before I got pregnant with our youngest daughter. In our household, my husband is the homemaker and I go out to work. He cooks, cleans, does the laundry, looks after the kids, and takes care of things around the house. He has often said he feels as though he is being watched, but can usually shrug it off. After we moved in, the older kids occasionally spoke of seeing a lady in a dressing gown walk past their bedroom door at night. At first, they thought it was me, but soon realized it wasn't. I would have thought it would have freaked the kids out, but she doesn't do anything but walk past the door and is never menacing. Our youngest was not even 6 months old when I had to go back to work, and my husband has said there are definite occasions when he is pretty tired and has 40 winks in his armchair while the baby has her afternoon nap upstairs. On one occasion, he was awakened with what he said felt like a strong squeeze on the right shoulder, to the point where he cried out. And he said he then felt a strong urge to check on the baby. When he got to the top of the stairs, he found the baby had wiggled about in the cot and had got herself tangled somehow in the cot surround, or people in the U.S. call it the crib bumper, and her bedclothes around her throat. She hadn't even cried out. He remembers the scent of roses being very prevalent, though we didn't have any flowers in the room. If he hadn't woken up, or been awakened when he did, the outcome may have been, well, he doesn't even want to think about what the alternative ending could have been. There was another time, one winter afternoon, I was at work, the kids were at school, and the power went out. We live in a pretty rural village, and it doesn't affect us much. The power outages don't usually last long anyway. My husband had just returned home from food shopping. The house had been locked while he was out, and we don't tend to leave windows open in the winter here. He came in the front door as usual, saw the power was off, and as he didn't want to carry the baby upstairs, settled her in the playpen in the front room and started to put away the shopping. Suddenly, he heard what he thought was an alarm clock radio come on, very loudly. It sounded to him like there was some sort of talk program going on, because all he could hear was a lady's voice talking. He thought the power must have come back on. He checked the microwave clock. Nope. He checked a few more appliances. Nope. No power. So, who was talking upstairs? Someone was actually talking upstairs. He was sure of it. It sounded like a woman. He then heard the floorboards creak in our room like someone was moving about. When you live in a house with 3 kids, you soon learn how to tell when one of those kids have snuck in your room, just by the floorboard noises. So he knew there was someone upstairs. Strangely, although he could hear the bass-like tones of the voice, he could not hear what the conversation was about. So he started quietly going up the stairs, as he thought I must have come home and was talking to someone on the phone. The closer he got to the top stair, the louder the voice got from our bedroom, until he put a toe on the landing, and then the voice simply stopped. Silence fell, and he just knew in his heart that voice had not been mine. He told me it took him a fairly long time to open the bedroom door, as all the hairs on his neck were on end. But when he did, there was nothing and no one there. But once again, quite a strong smell of roses. He double-checked the alarm clock, and the alarm was not on. The power outage had seen to that, and there was just no other explanation he could think of. The windows were all shut, and the back of our house is not near to a footpath or walkway. No one was in next door, either side, and the voice had definitely been inside the room and sounded like a person and not a radio sound. He was sure of it. He was quite shaken up, and it took him a while to tell me, as he really wanted to find a rational explanation. And even now he tries to rationalize it, saying, maybe it was someone going past out front, or maybe it was the radio going off on its own. But now, he always pauses to listen for any strange conversation when he gets home, just in case. He did rather kick himself that he didn't think to record the incident on his phone. He has said if it ever happens again, he will try to have the presence of mind to record it. There was also an incident when my younger sister came to stay for a couple of nights. She woke up in the night thirsty and thought she'd pop downstairs for a glass of water. She didn't bother turning the lights on, as it was a full moon and she could see pretty well. So once she was in the kitchen, she poured herself a cold drink of water and gulped it down. She then turned and saw me, or rather what she thought was me, standing in the doorway in a pink dressing gown. She hadn't heard me coming, so it startled her. "Oh, don't do that! You gave me a right fright, woman!" and laughed. Anyway, as she was washing her glass up and then drying it with a tea towel, she chatted away to the figure in the doorway about this and that, as sisters do, and all the time she said I was standing there listening, but not saying anything. She started towards the door to go upstairs, saying something like, "Hey, what's wrong with you? Cat got your tongue?" And then she realized the lady in the doorway wasn't me. She stopped dead in her tracks and said to the figure, "You're not my sister. Who are you?" And she said as she finished saying that, before her eyes, the figure in the door simply faded away. 1 second, a lady in a pink dressing gown was there. The next, gone. She said she knew someone was there, as she couldn't just see her, but could smell her perfume. The distinct smell of roses. She stood rooted to the spot with her heart beating in her throat for a couple of seconds before she bolted upstairs and hid under the covers. Upon reflection, however, she said she never felt any danger or foreboding. She certainly wasn't scared of the lady in the doorway, but it did freak her out when she disappeared, of course. Now, my youngest is a bit older and has herself spoken of the nice lady, or pink lady, who sometimes checks on her at night. My husband and I smile and nod and look at each other. My sister says there is definitely a kind lady spirit looking out for us here. I know whoever she is benevolent and simply seems to want to watch over us. Everyone is used to her. I am, frankly, a little disappointed that I am the only one in the house to have never seen or heard her myself. I do get the occasional scent of roses upstairs, though, as do other members of the family. I hope to see her one day. I'd like to thank her for watching over us. The Shushing Nurse. In my youth, I was a big believer in the paranormal, but as I got older, I began to have doubts. That all changed in 2008, when I was a patient in the Hartford Hospital in Hartford, Connecticut. I started having medical issues in 2007, recurring septic fevers brought on by a bacterial infection called cellulitis. I'd develop a fever, then go to the hospital, get admitted, then spend the next week or so hooked up to IV antibiotics until the infection was beaten back, only for it to rear its ugly head months later. During one particular bout of infection, I was in my room late at night, having trouble falling asleep. I was flipping through the channels on the television, hoping to find something interesting to alleviate my boredom while occasionally glancing to the door and greeting the passing nurses. As I finally settled on something interesting, I felt eyes on me, and turning to the door, noticed a nurse standing there looking at me. She was a kindly-looking nurse, maybe 30-ish, but I couldn't really tell for sure. "Hello," I said. She smiled, then placed her index finger up to her lips and quietly went, "Shh," then continued on her way down the hallway. I started to think, this was no ordinary nurse. She was not wearing the scrubs that modern nurses wear, but rather she had on the old-style white outfit from a bygone era, like they used to wear in the 1950s and 60s. I thought about it a little longer, until I drifted off to sleep. The next day, I asked about the costume party that must have happened the night prior. Halloween was near, and surely that was the explanation. Everybody I talked to about it looked at me strange and assured me there was nobody walking around in costume at any point. I chalked it up to a dream and forgot about it, until a few days later when I was discharged from the hospital. As I was wheeled into the lobby, which had been renovated since my previous visit, we passed a mural of the hospital history. And there on the wall was a photograph of nurses from the 1960s, all wearing outfits identical to the nurse from that night. Upon further investigation into the hospital history, I learned of a fire in that section of the building 50 years earlier on December 8, 1961, that resulted in the deaths of 16 people, one of whom was a nurse by the name of Maria Wingate. I can't tell you for certain that was the woman I saw, or if I recognized her in any picture. I've since told this story many times and gotten disbelief as well as claims of protective spirits and even guardian angels. I don't really know what to think. Perhaps it was just a friendly ghost just checking on her patients one last time. The soda bottle incident. I've always been a skeptic of the paranormal. I'm a very logical and scientific guy. I'm a Christian, and sure, I believe in an afterlife, but I didn't think that souls lingered in our world after they died. That was until 2015, my second year of college, when I went from being a skeptic to convinced that there are things that defy explanation. If I had not experienced this myself, I'd be calling the ones who had crazy or delusional. I am not one to make up crazy stories. I'm totally sober, and besides some stress issues, and good mental health. My two friends, Lee and Mike, and I moved into a small apartment just off campus. It was an old kind of rundown-looking building that was built more than a century ago. It had once been a home, then a record store, and a few years ago a professor bought it and remodeled it into 4 individual apartments with 2 on each floor that was split right down the middle and had a common hall and stairway that all tenants shared. Each apartment had a living room, kitchen, bathroom/laundry room, and 2 bedrooms. It wasn't much, but hey, it was my first apartment, and I didn't have to live in the dorms. The freedom of it was awesome, so the 3 of us were more than happy to live there. It was about a block from campus, and the professor who owned it leased it to college students for a fair price. The apartment we lived in had been the living room years ago. When it was remodeled, 2 walls were put up to make the rooms private and separated from the rest of the apartment. This created a long hall that led back to my room. One of the original vertical support posts was left exposed and had a 5-inch gap between it and the wall of the hallway. The other was slightly smaller, and that was Lee's room. Mike stayed in the living room on the couch. When we first moved in, we were the only people renting there, but there were always a lot of noises. We lived on the bottom, and we heard people walking up the stairs and above us a lot, and at all hours of the day and night. We just assumed it was more people looking to rent and touring the place, or maybe just the sounds of the old house settling. When I asked the landlord about the people looking at the place, he told me that I was mistaken. There hadn't been anybody looking at the other apartments. Nobody had been in the building since we had moved in. After a few weeks, we all began having strange dreams, sleeplessness, and an overall lack of energy, waking up in the middle of the night feeling like we were being watched. I'm an insomniac, but Lee and Mike could sleep through anything, yet both of them started losing sleep as well. I said it was just because we had no curtains and could see straight out into the street and into the parking lot of a nearby grocery store. After coming in one night, Mike mentioned an old man in the common hallway and asked if neighbors had moved in. I knew no one had, so we assumed it was maybe someone looking to rent, or maybe the landlord had sent someone to do some maintenance. Then we started having stuff disappear. Both Lee and Mike chewed tobacco and would have cans of it go missing. We also played a lot of video games, so there were controllers and batteries all over the place that would just vanish. Our keys and wallets would be gone. We would search that apartment and basically turn it upside down looking for our missing stuff, only to have it show back up sitting on the coffee table or on the couch cushions that we had thrown off the search under them and then put back in place. We all had a good laugh. We must have been just absent-minded and overlooked it. Soon, we began joking about a ghost. The disappearances became more frequent after that. Mike had a girlfriend at the time, and she had a dog. The dog would come over and whine, whimper like it was scared, and suddenly begin growling in the direction of the door to Lee's room, as if something was in there agitating her. It would also do the same to the stairwell out in the hall. I was an electrical student at the time and had just bought some equipment. I had multimeters and a non-contact voltage tester. They would go nuts in the apartment so bad that I would have to remove the batteries. I learned that these old buildings had unshielded knob and tube electrical wires at one point. They could build up a magnetic field that would remain for years after the wiring was removed. I knew these fields could mess with your perception and attributed all the discomfort we experienced to this explainable electrical latency. Looking back, I guess I was like every stereotypical dad in those ghost and haunting movies. I wrote everything off as purely just quirks of an old house and nothing more. We continued our jokes about the ghost. One night I was the only one there and decided to get something from the store. Mike and Lee left for the weekend, but I hadn't. When I came in and walked past the stairs, I know I saw someone looking at me from the corner of my eye. I turned quickly and saw nothing. I told myself it was a trick of the light. The hall was lined with record album sleeves, and I wrote it off as seeing a face on one of those. While we were all playing video games one night, I looked up and saw that same face peeking between that post and the wall I spoke of earlier. I told Lee and Mike to look. We all saw it for a split second before it faded back into the walls. I just rationalized it as a combination of tricks of light and our imagination. I always had a logical explanation. That was until we all experienced what happened next. I had just returned from spring break. I had gone skiing in Aspen, and while there, I had bought a 6-pack of glass bottle chocolate sodas from a local candy store as small souvenirs for my friends. I kept 2 of them, and after tasting the first, decided to leave the other one closed because they were disgusting. I placed the unopened one on top of the fridge in the dead center. A few weeks later, while Lee, Mike, a friend of ours named Matt, and I were hanging out in the living room watching a movie, Lee ran out of tobacco and decided to go to the store to get more. He asked if any of us wanted anything, and we all said no. Before he walked out the door, I jokingly said, "Hey, you forgot to ask our ghost if he wants anything." To which Lee replied, "Okay. You want anything from the store, Mr. Ghost?" We all laughed, but right then, that soda bottle flew clear across the kitchen to the center of the living room like a bullet. When it got to the center of the room, it just stopped midair and dropped like it hit a wall or something. It landed straight up, and the bottle cap shot off, and it sprayed everywhere. We were all looking at it in shock. At first, each of us thought that one of the others was playing a joke, but we soon realized no one was laughing. We all looked at each other and didn't say another word about it. We were all pretty freaked. After that incident, we stopped talking about the ghost, and most everything went back to normal. Stuff would still go missing, and we all still felt weirded out, but it mostly calmed down. Around that time, others had already moved into every other apartment, so maybe we just were better able to ignore it when we could attribute it to all the other tenants. My 2 roommates moved out after school ended. I stayed because I had a lease for a year, so I was left there alone for another 2 months. At night, I would hear footsteps or get that weird feeling again like I was being watched. I would see shadows out of the corner of my eye, but tried my best to ignore them. I moved out when my lease expired, and the strange, ominous feeling went away, and so did the strange dreams. 2 other guys we knew moved into our old apartment after us, and they mentioned some similar things like disappearing items, lack of sleep, noises, and other stuff going on. Mike later came back and moved in with them. He said it was calmer than before, but stuff still happened. Mike still lives there to this day and says he hasn't had any incidents since then, like it had moved on. I've stayed over there a few times since as well. It still had a creepy feeling, but the events had stopped. I still can't explain the soda bottle incident logically. We never checked into the history of the place. We were afraid we'd find out something we didn't want to know. I should say that we never felt threatened. It was just like our ghost was mischievous. But while he was harmless, it was still a bit disconcerting. One other interesting fact to add is that a very old sign was found under the building during the remodel. It was a large board that had the words Iglesia Bautista Cristo Salva carved into it by hand. The strict translation for my non-Spanish-speaking friends is Baptist Church, Christ Saves. No one knows where it came from, and it had to have been under there for decades. Not sure what to make of it, so I don't even bother to try. It surely was a most interesting year living with our ghostly friend. This has been another edition of Strange But True Stories. Have you ever been in the presence of a benevolent or malevolent spirit? Or had a paranormal experience that you can't quite explain? Tell us about it. Send us an email to strangebutTrueStories2@gmail.com. All of these stories you just heard were submitted to us by viewers just like you. Also, leave us a comment below and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks to those who have. It's greatly appreciated. I'm Steve White. Thanks for watching this episode. Until next time.